Welcome this evening. My name is Lynette Clementson, and I am director of Wallace House. We are home. Thank you. We are home to the Knight Wallace Fellowships for Journalists and the Livingston Awards for Young Journalists here at the University of Michigan. And this evening, we're putting on this show as part of the university's Speech and Inclusion series. We have been planning this for a while. This series came along, and it seemed like the topic of this speech, the focus of this show, made for something that should be under this umbrella, and so we welcome you here tonight. At Wallace House, we support journalism and journalists, and one of the things that we believe in steadfastly is the absolute necessity of a free and independent press as necessary for a functional democracy. And a free press, we should point out, as guaranteed in the First Amendment of the Constitution. And so bringing a show called 1A here, which is named for the First Amendment, we have a point by doing that. And I came here, it should be noted, from NPR. And so I won't talk too much more about Wallace House. You can find out about our future events on our website. And here you can follow along on the show by Twitter, submit your questions. We'll have space afterwards for people to join the show. And with that, thank you all for also being Michigan Radio supporters. And I'm going to turn things over to Steve Schramm of Michigan Radio.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Lynette. At Michigan Radio, it's our pleasure to work with Wallace House in bringing what is a special presentation for you tonight with Joshua Johnson and 1A. As you might know, 1A has been on the air since January 2nd of last year as the successor program to the Diane Rehm Show, which was on Michigan Radio for decades. I want to quickly tell you the backstory about how this show came to be. Because we were a longtime Diane Rehm station, we were brought into a small circle of stations that were asked to help pick the successor program. And the summer of 16, we were hearing a number of similar names that we knew in public radio that may or may not be the right fit. And we got to a point near, like around September of that year, we're going, boy, what are we going to do? We have not found the new icon to Diane. And then on our next conference call, they bubbled up the name of this fellow by the name of Joshua Johnson. None of us on the call were really familiar with him at the time. He was at KQED in San Francisco. We listened to his tapes and his hosting abilities, and I remember very vividly on the call saying, "That's it, our work is done." So I'm so delighted. I'm so delighted that we have him here tonight because just as we've done before, we really enjoy bringing the premier NPR personalities and programs to you here in Ann Arbor and throughout Michigan. As Michigan Radio is the state's most listened to public radio station and celebrating our 70th year of service to the state of Michigan, we are so proud. Thank you. All of you are the reasons why we have been here for 70 years and will continue to bring the journalism that Lynette has talked about, the award-winning journalism, to you every day. So without further ado, it is our pleasure to bring to you the host of 1A, Joshua Johnson.
Hi, everybody. Wow. Oh, my goodness. Oh, stop it. How many Michigan students have no idea why they're clapping for me? Is there anybody? There's no clue? What's a radio? Glad you asked, young lady. Way back in the Stone Age. What's up, Ann Arbor? How you doing? It's so good to see you. Wow. Oh, my goodness. Welcome. Thank you all for making time for us. Thank you for mostly packing this place. This is awesome. This looks like Howard Hughes' living room. This is really pretty cool. My name is Joshua Johnson. I am the host of 1A from WAMU and NPR, and I bring you greetings from WAMU 88.5, the service of American University in Washington. We are so thrilled that you decided to spend this evening with us to talk about something that is exactly at the heart of the work that we do. Any issue involving the First Amendment, the 5 freedoms that are protected therein, is right up our alley. And we think being here in such an awesome college town at such a phenomenal university is a perfect place to have this conversation. So thank you very much for making time for us. We'll try to make it worth your while. Tonight we're going to do a couple things. One is the discussion that you are here to hear and to see. The other is to give you a look at what it is that makes 1A tick. We're going to do this conversation as if it is a live production of 1A. So we will do this on the clock. It'll be less than an hour long. We will use all the same breaks. You will see how I move through scripts and I'm throwing paper up in the air, and we'll integrate audience comments from you. You'll be able to email and tweet and post to Facebook and be part of the conversation. It'll give you a look at all of the insanity that goes on when we try to put this show together. I'm curious, how many of you are regular listeners of 1A? How many of you have never heard 1A? You're kind of new to the show. You came because someone dragged you along. You thought there'd be car keys under your seat? I'm not Oprah. Raise your hands high. You never heard 1A. You're not sure exactly who we are. Excellent. How many of you do not own a radio except in your car? Yeah, exactly. You're what's wrong with the world. You people. Kidding, of course. We're thrilled to have you here. For those of you who are not familiar with us, 1A is a daily news talk program that's produced by WAMU and distributed by NPR. We are the legacy of a previous program called The Diane Rehm Show, which ran for 37 years and had a very strong fan base here in Ann Arbor. Our goal on 1A is to be a mirror to the nation, to reflect the nation back to itself, and help us talk about what we see and what we would rather see. We cover a little bit of everything. We do fun topics and serious topics every Friday. We review the week's news in the Friday News Roundup. We do all kinds of frequent features like a 1A movie club. This month's movie, by the way, Black Panther. We will be discussing that next week. I may leave in the middle of this taping to go see it. One of you might have to finish the show. But we talk about a little bit of everything, and we're honored to have you here to see what it is that we do. Please do bear in mind that we are live streaming this. If you want to share this with someone so they can be part of the conversation, they can find the link on our website at the1a.org. That's the word the number 1, the letter A.org. Do bear in mind also that we are recording this event. It might be broadcast on NPR, depends on how the event turns out, but please do bear in mind that we are recording. I probably don't need to say either of these two things, but I need to say these two things. Number 1, please silence your phones. Please do silence all your digital devices. You don't have to shut them off because we'd love you to interact, but please just make sure that they don't go off or I might have to in the head. So please silence your phones. The other thing I probably don't need to mention, but because it's a live taping, I probably should. Because this is a controversial topic that we're discussing, and we know that Michiganders are dealing with this on colleges across the state right now, because this is controversial, we would ask that you please keep the energy in this discussion positive. Nothing turns a listener off faster from a topic they would like to engage with, like hissing, heckling, or booing. Neutral energy is much more positive than booing. Letting a comment that you don't like just sit there in silence like a dog who left a turd on the floor is much more effective than booing. So please keep the energy tonight as positive as you can. If you hear something you don't like, comment on it. Allow me to integrate your comment as a counter-argument, as opposed to booing, hissing, or heckling. We would greatly appreciate that. I mentioned that we are on the clock. The show has 3 segments. The first segment that you'll hear me tape in just a second is the billboard. That's the 60-second introduction, the part with the theme music where I say, from WAMU and NPR in Washington, this is 1A. That part. I'm going to do that first. I will not dance. But once we tape the billboard, we'll bring out the guests. That's the part where the NPR newscast would sit live from NPR News in Washington. And then we'll begin the first segment. It's 12 minutes long, goes by super fast. You'll hear the breaks. We'll have music between the breaks. You'll hear funding credits, and it should give you a sense of the pace of the program as we do it. Afterwards, we'll have a little time for Q&A. I'll try to stick around, shake some hands, take some pictures, and chat with some of you, those of you who helped make 1A so very successful. Sound good? All right. I know this is an NPR crowd, but you're going to have to give me more than that. Does it sound good? All right. Now, first step, I'm going to take my seat. All right. I have these cute little headphones that I wear whenever I'm on camera. Otherwise, I wear the big bulky ones because nobody can see me. Give me 1 second while I set up. First thing I'm going to do is tape the billboard. When we meet in the mornings, we have our morning editorial meeting, check in on that day's show, make sure everything is in place. When we break up, I write the billboards. Our executive producer, Rupert Allman, writes the promos that you hear. We peer edit, and then once everything is ready to go, I head down into the studio and track the billboard. Now, this is 55 seconds long. I'm going to try to do this properly. One direction I need to give you, whenever you see my hand go up like this, I need applause. And when I put it down, you can stop. All right? So let's try it. You are educated people. I think we're going to have fun. All right. Let's give this billboard a shot. You ready? In 3. Kids today, they just say whatever's on their minds, except at college, where some First Amendment issues have educators worried and students furious. From WAMU and NPR, this is 1A. Hey there, I'm Joshua Johnson visiting the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. Today on 1A, free speech on campus. Universities are facing a major dilemma: how to encourage the free flow of ideas, even controversial or insulting ideas, while respecting students' desire for a respectful and inclusive environment. Often it's student against student, sometimes shouting each other down to keep unwelcome guests away. How should universities deal with free speech? What does the law require? And how are Michigan students raising their voices? Share what you know about campus free speech, comment on our Facebook page, or tweet us at 1A. This is 1A. I'm Joshua Johnson visiting the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. The free speech movement was born at a university, Berkeley, in the 60s, and the hottest debates right now over free speech are often happening on college campuses. It's easy to see why some educators are unsure how to proceed or even nervous about doing anything. This issue takes so many forms, it's hard to know where to start. Do you begin with black students who are sick of having to deal with microaggressions and white privilege? Or perhaps with tensions between Jewish and Muslim students over Middle East policy? Of course, we have LGBTQ kids who often feel marginalized in a heteronormative culture. There are concerns about what some call rape culture on campus. The voices of those who think the promotion of anti-abortion arguments exacerbates the view that men control women's bodies, or even conservative students who say they feel unsafe speaking their politics at all. One issue in particular that's front and center for colleges in Michigan: after much protest, the white supremacist Richard Spencer is expected to speak for 2 hours at Michigan State University in March on the first day of spring break. How should universities deal with issues like this and with firebrands like him? Joining us here on stage at the Rackham Auditorium at the University of Michigan is Angela Dillard, an Associate Dean for Undergraduate Education in the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts. Angela, welcome to 1A.
Thank you so much. Good to
Also
be here.
with us is Faith Spar, a lecturer of communication studies at the University of Michigan. Her research includes free speech and public events and public spaces online. Faith, welcome.
Thank you.
We're also joined by 2 students who've been on opposing sides of inviting a recent controversial speaker here to U of M to discuss their experiences. Jesse Arm is a senior and chairman of the American Enterprise Institute's Michigan Executive Council. He helped bring Speaker Charles Murray to campus last fall. Jesse, glad to have you with us.
Happy to be here.
And Maximilian Alvarez is a PhD candidate in comparative literature and history. He is the co-founder of the Campus Anti-Fascist Network at the University of Michigan, and his group was one of those that protested Charles Murray's visit to campus. Maximilian, glad to have you with us.
Yep.
Angela, let me start with you regarding Richard Spencer speaking on campus. We're told he's not going to be speaking at Michigan this semester. Talk about how this came about and how the university's been dealing with it.
So it's been quite a struggle for us here on campus, in different levels of the administration on campus, and trying to figure out, how to really get on top of this, how to make sure that we're fulfilling our obligations legally, concerns about safety, and not just safety, but the idea that we would have such a divisive, potentially dangerous person who is followed by violence, and what that might mean and how disruptive that might be on a college campus to the real work of our campus, and especially with the instructional undergraduate mission here. We've been back and forth and around the block and down the block, and it's been a really contentious thing. It's not something that I think the University of Michigan is of one mind about, although we do have an upper administration and a board of regents who are empowered to make those kinds of decisions for the community writ large. But it's been a real mess, and I think everybody kind of realizes that it's been a divisive moment on campus. And we are really trying to stay on top of it and get through this semester and make sure that we're fulfilling all of our obligations simultaneously.
Faith Spar, talk a little bit about what U of M has to do as a publicly funded university. The First Amendment has some very serious implications for publicly funded universities, who schools like this are allowed to welcome on campus or turn away, or how schools have to deal with just about anyone with an otherwise lawful reason to be here, even if it is someone as vile as Richard Spencer.
Right. With respect to the legal obligations that the university has, they are complicated. With respect to Spencer coming, we should make clear that no one invited him, right? But he wants to use campus space. And a lot of the courts have determined that campus space is what's called limited public forum. And courts don't look too kindly on what's called viewpoint-based restrictions in those limited public forums. So that's something that I'm sure that the General Counsel's office is looking at quite a bit. So there are obvious First Amendment obligations with respect to this public forum issue. They've opened up this space to any speaker who might want to come. Can they deny this space to him because of the potentiality of violence? The potentiality of violence is what I would call a neutral factor, which means that it's not based on the content of his speech. It's the fact that violence seems to befall wherever he goes, and that's something that the university, I think, can in fact take into consideration.
So the issue, just to make sure we're clear with regard to the First Amendment, the rules have to be content neutral. You can't just say, nice people can speak here or people we like can speak here, but if there's a potential of real violence, that gives the university under the law more latitude.
If it's content neutral, it's more likely to be upheld by the court. It's not the only thing they can take into account, but content neutrality would be more likely to be upheld by a court.
Maximilian Alvarez, I do want to talk more about the specific story that we brought you and Jesse here for in a minute, but in general, with regards to free speech here on campus, how free do you feel as a student to speak your mind and also to be heard here at U of M? Broadly speaking, how's the climate these days?
Climate's not great, and I think that's one of the very few things Jesse and I could probably agree on. But I do want to say that it's impossible to separate the campus climate here from what's going on nationally, and I think that representing the Campus Anti-Fascist Network and other coalitions like the Stop Spencer Coalition here at U of M, we find it really sad that one day after a confirmed white nationalist murdered his teachers and fellow students in cold blood, one day after the shooting in Florida, I have to still try to convince skeptical people that those of us who are trying to keep people like the Florida shooter from invading our campus en masse, that we're not the real problem, that we're not the real fascists. And from an institutional standpoint, like Angela said, it's important to note that the university administration is not monolithic. But from the highest echelons of university power, we find it to be a cruel joke that the university's response to the imminent threat of white supremacist and neo-fascist violence on campus is to frame the discussion in terms of speech and inclusion.
And just by way of context, just so it's clear, the shooter in the Florida shooting in Parkland, Florida, reporting has indicated that he is a member of a known white nationalist, white supremacist organization called the Republic of Florida, and reportedly took part in training with them in the lead up to the shooting in Parkland. Jesse Arm, what about you? How do you feel, broadly speaking, about the environment for free speech here at U of M?
Yeah, I think I agree with Maximilian, as he said earlier, not with everything, but about the first thing. I think that it's really difficult on campus for people to express their mind in this climate. We've got students on both sides of the aisle, particularly on one side of the aisle, who feel that consistently they're not entitled to say what they think. And I think that Maximilian is one student who should be entitled to say what he thinks. I think that I'm another student who should be entitled to say what I think. Look, I think that we've got a real problem if our classrooms, if our professors, if everyone who's a part of this community of the University of Michigan is engaging in some kind of veto to shut down people with whom they disagree. If we can't have a productive dialogue, if we can't have conversations that forward the marketplace of ideas on this campus, then we've lost. Then we're no longer intellectually sustaining ourselves.
We're talking about free speech on campus with Jesse Arm, chairman of the American Enterprise Institute's Michigan Executive Council, Maximilian Alvarez, co-founder of the Campus Anti-Fascist Network, Associate Dean for Undergraduate Education Angela Dillard, Communications Law Professor Faith Spar, and with you. What questions and thoughts do you have about free speech on college campuses? We'd especially love to hear from the folks here in Rackham Auditorium about your thoughts of how U of M has dealt with these controversies, or if you are watching our live stream right now and you're in another part of the country where universities are dealing with this well or not well, what's working or not working? Email us, 1a@wamu.org, comment on our Facebook page, or tweet us at 1a. Matthew tweeted, "Free speech is not an everyday concern in my classroom. My students speak, share their views, and debate while always remaining civil and respectful." Angela, do you think, and Matthew did not say what institution he teaches at, but do you think stories like Matthew's are the exception at U of M? Are they the norm at U of M? By and large, how do you think the school's doing?
So I hope Matthew is an LSA student, for sure. I think, I think his perspective is right. So I think that
I'm sorry, beg your pardon. Sorry to interrupt. He is an associate professor of history and American culture.
Oh, okay.
Sorry about that.
He's in LSA. I think that there are two or three things that are correct simultaneously about this space, about free speech, and about what the campus climate is like, what it's like inside of classrooms. I tend to think that the free speech space is a bit of a red herring. I mean, I think what we really have a challenge with on campus is real democratic engagement across partisan lines, engagement across, an ideological divide that seems to be hardening day in, day out, not only on campuses, but in the country in general. In fact, I think that what's great about being on a college campus is that this place, more than most other places in our society, we have a real shot at trying to think about engagement and trying to think about tolerance, trying to think about conversation, debate, dialogue. I really think that the college students have gotten a bad rap a lot in this space. There's no reason why college students and young adults are going to be any different than their parents or their grandparents. I mean, we have a really divisive culture out there. And I do think that there are experiences in classrooms where that kind of debate really is possible.
And I do want to talk more about the climate. I agree with you. I think a lot of college students get a real bad rap, but this is one of these things that universities are partly charged with helping college students navigate. And I'd like to talk about the best ways, or the ways that work, to help navigate that as we continue with U of M lecturer Faith Spar, U of M Associate Dean Angela Dillard, Maximilian Alvarez of the Campus Anti-Fascist Network, Jesse Arm of the Michigan Executive Council, and with you. I'm Joshua Johnson, glad to be with you from the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. You are listening to 1A from WAMU and NPR. This is 1A. I'm Joshua Johnson. We're discussing free speech on campus with students Maximilian Alvarez and Jesse Arm, Communications Law Professor Faith Spar, and Associate Dean for Undergraduate Education Angela Dillard. We'd love to hear from you too. Comment on our Facebook page, tweet us at 1A, or email 1a@wamu.org. We got some comments in earlier from the U of M community about free speech here on campus. We'll get to those in just a second, but Jesse, I know you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I think I wanted to respond to Angela's comments from a little bit earlier about hoping that that student was an LSA student. And I would just respond by saying, as an LSA student myself, I really don't think it's the case. I think that the climate in my classes, just going through, purely speaking from personal experience here, not speaking about my organization or anything of that nature, I'd simply say that all perspectives really are not welcome in the classroom. And especially because you've got an environment, because when professors are emboldened by their university to teach whatever they want and argue whatever positions they want, and they're surrounded in a bubble of like-minded thinkers, you've created an environment where it's almost like policy dictates the agenda. And when you're allowed to teach policy as though it's a matter of fact, then grade retribution problems exist. If you disagree with your professor, all of a sudden you're disagreeing with the content of his course. And a little bit of this manifested itself, I think, immediately after the election, when you had university professors openly endorsing one candidate, it wasn't the winner, in their classrooms and pushing their agenda. And you had this going on transparently. And then you had the president of the entire university come out immediately following the election with statements like doomsday had just happened. And that's not to say that I think we have to have an apolitical campus or even an apolitical classroom. I think that people are entitled to their views. But when you've created an environment where only when one narrative is so predominant over the other, then you do have students who are afraid to speak out. And I've had trouble speaking out in Middle East policy classes about even citing the opinions of a Bill Kristol or a Bernard Lewis. I'm not talking about the alt-right here.
Right.
I'm talking about center-right perspectives on politics.
Before I come to Maximilian, I know you wanted to chime in. Excuse me, I just wanted to follow up with you, Jesse. This climate that you say was created on campus with a kind of a one-directional political view, it sounds like you're saying it stifled you from really feeling comfortable speaking your mind without feeling like you were going to get kind of beat about the head and shoulders for doing it?
Sometimes literally.
Well, I'm sure, because that has happened on college campuses.
That's the Antifa.
How much of the responsibility do you think rests on the university, and how much of that responsibility rests on you to just say, I'm going to say what I think, and I don't care what you think?
I mean, the university is huge on safe spaces. The biggest safe space you can guarantee is one that ensures everyone's right to free speech.
Right, but when those conflicts come up, at what point do you as a student, as a free-thinking member of the democracy, need to just step up and say, look, whether the university is with me or not, this is what I think?
I mean, that's a really hard thing to do. Like, I could have gone to a Hillsdale college or put myself in some other environment where I'd be surrounded by like-minded thinkers, but that's not what I sought to do. I went to go to my public university, and I wanted to have an education where I'm entitled to say my piece and hopefully be protected by my university for that.
Maximilian, you wanted to jump in. Go ahead.
Right. So I have some specific things to respond to that, but I think I'll save them for when we get talking specifically about the Charles Murray event.
And we'll get to that in a second.
But one of the things that I think connects this to Angela's point about the free speech question being more of a red herring than anything is that there's an unbearable double standard here. Regarding everything that Jesse said, this kind of narrative of conservative victimization is actually feeding the very thing that we're trying to fight against, and what we're trying to fight against is actual white supremacists who want to storm our campus and their violent supporters. This narrative of victimization gives dangerous people a protective blanket to come in here with their violent supporters under the banner of free speech, at the same time that the community that lives here and wants to protest and defend itself is labeled the threat to free speech.
Can you clarify exactly what you mean by conservative victimization? Are you talking about conservative students just saying, hey, I don't feel safe here? Or are you talking about something that someone did, like an action that conservative students have taken?
I'm talking about this notion that having your views challenged means that you're being nailed to the cross, when that's actually what universities are supposed to be for, as Jesse even said, a place for productive engagement with debate and different ideas. Like sometimes the people in the room may be more on one side than the other, but I think unless the teacher comes in and says, you're not allowed to say that, you're not being victimized, you're just participating in the public square.
Let me get to a few listener comments, and then Faith, I'd like to bring you back in. Marjorie thinks that Spencer's visit could be a learning opportunity. Marjorie wrote, as Representative John Lewis mentioned when he appeared at UM, the university could model the approach on their nonviolent strategies used in the civil rights marches. Classes could be taught, strategies could be developed in advance of Spencer's appearance. Think of the visual impact of hundreds of students standing quietly with their backs turned and their ears plugged. Or maybe John Lewis could be a counterbalance speaker. Contrast that with what Angie wrote. Angie is a PhD candidate, and Angie writes, I understand that Richard Spencer has not been invited to speak by any member of the university and is not a student, employee, or alumni of UM. Is the university under a legal obligation as a public institution to rent or make available university facilities to any member of the public? If so, where are the details of this obligation spelled out?
I think the short answer to that is they are not under a legal obligation if you think it's a limited public forum, which is kind of legal insider baseball. But what the university has done, and Angela can help me out with this, is that there are certain spaces that they have opened up for the public to rent. And they haven't put any limitations on some of those spaces thus far. They could choose to, because it's a limited public forum, to reevaluate that policy. My understanding is Texas A&M has done that very thing. They've decided that it has to be a student or faculty-sponsored speaker. I don't know if the University of Michigan is contemplating that, if they think that that's something they want to do, but they could do that if they want to going forward.
One more comment, and then I do want to talk about the Charles Murray situation. Karen emailed, I was quote-unquote caught in a protest on campus here in Ann Arbor a couple months ago against Mr. Spencer and could not move my car. And I thought, finally, students are becoming activists again like in the 60s and the 70s. Hooray! Well, Maximilian, there was a big protest here on campus in response to Charles Murray coming to campus. I saw some of the footage that Vice News shot where you basically shouted this guy down, this guy who co-authored this highly, highly, highly controversial book, The Bell Curve. I wonder what you and the students who protested with you wanted to achieve by shutting him down. What did you want to accomplish, and did you?
We did not shut down Charles Murray's speech. Charles Murray was challenged by the audience. He had plenty of time to speak. A graduate student, a very smart, brave graduate student by the name of Brian Ransom went on stage because Murray's response was that none of you have read my work, so you can't challenge me. Ransom has read his work. He went on stage and he was debating him for about 25 minutes, right? It was heated, but Murray had plenty of chances to respond. And I remember when finally it was clear that Murray wasn't going to give Ransom clear answers that respected his position, but he was just going to keep deflecting the real issue from the issues that the audience wanted to have Murray address. Ransom got fed up. He left the stage, and he shouted something at Murray. And I remember leaning over to the person next to me and saying, I hope that's not the only thing Vice shows. And that's exactly what they did. We did not shut it down. We went there to make our voices heard. Campus Anti-Fascist Network held a informational protest on the Diag earlier that day because we felt that as educators, we would be doing a huge disservice to our students and to our community if we let Charles Murray's presence on campus go unquestioned. That didn't mean that we were keeping him from speaking, but it did mean that in the same way, when we are grading papers and we tell students, hey, that's not a credible source, or hey, this argument has been debunked many times before, how do you respond to that? Our job as educators was to go in the Diag and give the public information about all the ways that Murray's pseudo-scholarship has been rebutted, defamed for decades. And we felt it was our responsibility as educators to make that known.
Thank you for the clarification. You did not shut him down. I misspoke. I apologize for that. Thank you for clarifying. But I would say you didn't really, from seeing the footage on Vice, and granted, that was just whatever they chose to edit, if you want to hold a debate with someone, cutting the lights in the room and putting a projection over him that says white supremacist with an arrow pointing down at him, I mean, why would someone want to talk to you after you framed the debate that way? That feels more like an attack. And that's your right if that's what you want to do, but does that help?
Right, so one important thing to point out, just like the administration, campus politics is not monolithic, and I think this goes back to the point that Angela made, where we are painted with a very broad brush, and it's usually a brush that doesn't paint us in a very positive light. So there were many different groups who chose to protest Murray in their own way. We tried as hard as we could to build a coalition of people who wanted to proceed with our plan, which was to provide an informational protest and then go hear what Murray had to say. But we completely understood that there were other student groups, organizations on campus who felt that more was necessary because this man was being invited into a place that is rife with racist and neo-fascist writing, with crimes, with spray paint saying "Free Dylan Roof." There were even flyers up at Stockwell Residence House the week before Murray came here citing his same bell curve as a reason to justify the low black admissions rate at the University of Michigan. So what did they think was going to happen when students get pissed off and come and try to protest?
Before I come to you, Angela, Jesse, let me let you jump in. Particularly, I'd like to hear from you, in addition to whatever response you had to Maximilian, what the goal was of bringing Charles Murray here. You must have known that this kind of response was coming. Did you plan for this? Did you have a contingency for this? Or?
Yeah, so I certainly agree with Maximilian that the campus is rife with neo-fascists, but I think we may have a disagreement about who's behaving like a neo-fascist. I think that the issue is the notion that these groups who came to the Charles Murray speech and played Darth Vader's Imperial March from Star Wars over him while he tried to speak, and shut off the lights, and put signs above him that said, "You're a white supremacist," and that students got up and screamed at the top of their lungs, "All Republicans are killing us, all men in suits are killing us, you're killing us, sir." Yeah, I think that's neo-fascism. And I think that constitutes as shutting down Dr. Murray's speech. To answer your question, we invited Dr. Murray because we wanted him to talk about one of his more recent works, Coming Apart, which I read. It's about the divide between the new American upper class and the new American lower class. And the book has been called Prescient by a lot of scholars because it was authored before the rise of Trump and this sort of new populism that manifested in the election of the president, who, by the way, Dr. Murray is vehemently opposed to on pretty much everything. So we invited Dr. Murray to speak about this book because we felt like it almost could maybe be a kumbaya moment for the campus, something where the right and the left could find some sort of agreement. Sure, we were aware of Dr. Murray's previous work. We were aware of the bell curve and the fact that he's an unpopular figure on the far left.
Well, hold on a second. If you were trying, I'm sorry.
But no.
I gotta stop you there for a second, because if you were trying to create a kumbaya moment between the left and the right, particularly after the election of Donald Trump, there were a lot of other people you could have picked.
Well, I guess
besides Charles Murray. Like, you must have known. And I'm not knocking you for picking who you wanted to pick.
No, well, I
guess
the mistake that we made was in assuming that he'd be allowed to speak, that he'd be allowed to have a platform to talk about his ideas. Because I do genuinely believe if someone goes and reads Coming Apart, or if someone hears Dr. Murray's views on the president, or on the president's policies, or on the president's rhetoric on the campaign trail, I do believe a kumbaya moment could have occurred. But I suppose that my mistake was in assuming that we would ever be allowed to hear Dr. Murray speak, which we obviously didn't really get to do until the protesters eventually walked out of the room.
Oh, let me bring Angela Dillard back in for just 1 second, particularly in light of a comment we got from Elizabeth, who is here in the audience at Rackham. She wrote, "I am a parent spending tens of thousands of dollars to send my kids to college. While I agree with Jesse Arm that hearing both sides of issues is important, I do not want my kids' safety threatened unnecessarily. by extremely controversial speakers. Jesse is too young to understand the enormity of the responsibility we parents carry. How do you interface with parents on this? Regardless of the free speech debate, which we can have ever so pleasantly on this lovely stage, you have parents all over Michigan and beyond, some of whom might be really scared to have their kids here in Ann Arbor when they just wanted to send them here to become engineers or biochemistry majors, and then they got to wade into this. How do you deal with parents on this?
So, I mean, I think the university is really clear that we have a policy around free speech and free expression, that people invited here to campus have a right to speak, they have a right to be heard, and that people have a right to protest. And the policy is really interesting. I mean, to figure out where does the right to protest cross a line and impinge on the right of a speaker to be heard. It's a really complicated space, and it's a really, really gray space for us on campus. And so when I'm out and about and talking to parents about these issues, about why this is an important debate to have, why we should be thinking about these things, why being on this campus right now, as difficult as it is sometimes, is creating a set of durable skills for young people that we think that they're going to carry with them, into their workplaces, into their communities, into their life after college is really important. And I tell parents, we could be having a protest on one part of campus, and on the other part of campus, people are just going to class.
I wonder if by way of, before we have to break faith, in terms of how universities are dealing with this, some universities have decided, particularly private universities like the University of Chicago, to say, look, we're going to have these debates. If you don't like it, don't show up. We're not the school for you. Before we have to break, how much of that are you hearing become the approach? I imagine some universities begin to lose patience with trying to make everybody happy, like Chicago, and say, look, if you come here, this is just par for the course.
I mean, I think the University of Michigan has had that history where they're going to defer to an open public forum. But I do think that there is a concern about violence, and that is a neutral concern that the university can take into account. So, yeah, I mean, I think that the universities can set the standard of what they want their forums to be used and the limits they want to place on it. And if so long as they do that neutrally, they'll probably be okay.
Tom is a former university staff member. Tom asks, why should any speaker be banned or shouted down? Isn't the answer to dangerous speech just more speech? What about the idea expressed by, I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it? Good question, Tom. We'll get into that as we continue our conversation. We know that this is an issue for many colleges and universities of all types. So where do we go from here? Stay close. Back now to our conversation with Faith Spar, Angela Dillard, Maximilian Alvarez, and Jesse Arm. Let me get to a few more of your comments. Paul from Ionia, Michigan wrote, free speech should not be used to preach negative views about other people. Richard Spencer has demonstrated that he is a racist in past speeches. What does this accomplish? Allowing people to get on a platform and continue the negativity only spreads it more. Enough is enough. Meg is a graduate student who works with young children. Meg wrote, it's difficult for me to explain or understand how the University of Michigan would allow someone who has a record of inciting violence onto our campus and into our community. The university president clearly has his reputation on the line, but no real skin in the game like so many others do. Jesse, I know you wanted to respond to that comment from the listener about being too young to understand. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that no one is too young or too old to do anything. That's like a very simple thing, I think, and I don't know, there's tones of ageism somewhere in there, but I'm not even gonna get into that. I would just point out, I'd say kind of look to the panel, okay, this panel. I'm the only undergraduate up here with a PhD candidate, an associate dean of LSA, and an attorney and professor in the comms department. Congrats on all your work, but the deck is kind of stacked, no? Like, I'm the only one who's going to be delivering a center-right perspective on these issues. And I think that is symptomatic of the larger problem at these universities.
I'm sorry, speaking as an educator, and I used to teach journalism at UC Berkeley, welcome to democracy. That's the way this works. Sometimes you're going to have to stand by yourself, and I'm kind of wondering whether or not...
Yeah, but you put me up here by myself. I didn't choose to stand here by myself.
I'm sorry, can you show me the court order that told you have to be at the Rackham Auditorium
No,
tonight?
not...
You agreed to be here, and
I'm
what I'm
very
wondering
happy to be
is
here. And
whether or not...
Joshua, I'm very happy to be here.
Well,
And
what
I
I'm
don't want to
wondering is-
misconstrue the invitation as me being upset. But I just want to say that I do think there are certain imbalances here that play into the conversation. And I think that goes with the too young to understand comment. I don't have the resumes of these other individuals here, and I'm not going to sit here and debate the First Amendment with people who are so better qualified than me to talk about it. But I am going to give the student perspective on these issues, and I do know that it's not right to say to a student who feels that when they bring in their speaker, or they bring in individuals who do have a different perspective than university administrations, when other students, factually speaking, come in and do things to drown out that speaker's voice, I don't think it's fair to say, oh, well, we gave you a chance to respond. We gave you a chance to speak.
Maximilian, can you empathize at all with what Jesse is trying to say? Like, is there any meeting of the minds here at all? Do you see where he's coming from at all?
No. But
Not in the least, not at all?
no, so here's what I say. I do empathize with the plight that Jesse is articulating. What I don't empathize with is the way that he is using that to do something else. And here's what I mean. I have never once received a negative comment from a student, anonymous or otherwise, about being politically overbearing from one side to the other. I love good debate. I grew up a very Catholic, very conservative guy, and now I'm a lefty nut job, but I still love, good, honest debate. And the thing that I've noticed is that I have plenty of conservative students whom I work with, who I talk to, who I ask, how do we get better discussions like the ones we have in class? And the thing that they point to is not me or some other lefty professor. They point to people like Jesse or the college Republicans at UCLA who are not trying to engage in honest, open, rigorous academic debate, but who are living by actually a very nihilistic ideology where their whole goal is to bring people here who's going to piss off their classmates and their faculty and their community. Like we said, if you wanted a kumbaya moment, invite someone who you know isn't going to be so frickin', crazy, given the environment here. Give someone who has really rigorous and thoughtful scholarly work that hasn't been laughed out of the academic stage. I think that there's still plenty of room for really great, open, productive debate between right and left on our campuses. But I think that it's actually being hindered more than anything else by this kind of trolling tactic from people who don't want to engage in that but just want to piss people off and then play the victim.
Faith Spar, let me bring you back in on this in terms of how to make that happen. Part of me sees both sides of this. I hear Jesse when he's saying that he feels frequently shouted down. And I hear Maximilian when he says that if you want to build the bridge, this ain't the way to build it. I also, thinking as an educator, know that I have a different perspective on this than the students that I'm trying to help grow. Is it the responsibility of Maximilian and Jesse to build these bridges? Or is that a sign that the university is falling short? I would think it's the responsibility, possibly, of people who understand these issues with a little more experience and who have the means to say, we know there's an issue, let us figure out a way to do this so you don't have to go it alone. I mean, is this a reflection of a larger problem in academia that we're leaving it to students to solve these problems alone?
I think it's both. I mean, I think that the universities can do more to bridge this gap, and I think the students can do more to bridge the gap as well. But, I mean, there's another part of this, and I think about it from a First Amendment perspective, because that's what I teach, which is that whole theory and metaphor of the marketplace of ideas, which is, well, and Maximilian said it so nicely, which is, yeah, it's great to have a debate, but if Richard Spencer comes to campus and he says, I want a white ethno-national state, what do I say? I don't want that? Is that my debate? I don't know how to debate that. So to me, sometimes the marketplace of ideas breaks down, that metaphor breaks down sometimes, and that bridge can't be gapped. I don't want that bridge to be gapped, right?
Angela Dillard, what about the responsibility to protect students' rights to protest. I mean, what we saw in the footage from Vice is a constitutionally protected form of protest. And just like students need to be able to engage, they also need to be able to live out that right too. How do universities make space for that?
I actually do, going back to the question about, how do we talk to parents, how do we talk to a broader public? I mean, sometimes we do talk with people about the right to protest and why that matters, and why that's part of, democratic engagement, while that's part of, what it means to have a robust and vibrant culture on a campus, both politically and intellectually. And that the university has obligations in that way as well, to make sure that people are able to engage in expressing their views, especially including when those views are in fact against the institution itself. And speaking from the perspective of somebody who has in fact been protested, it is not pleasant, but it is something that we think is important for our students to be able to engage in, and to be able to engage in safely. So that's part of the landscape too, right? So you've got free speech issues, you've got stuff around engagement, you've got stuff around tolerance. You have stuff around, how do we come up with an education that might encourage people to change their minds based on what they're hearing about somebody who has a different set of views? And then how do we allow people to protest when they feel like they're moved by that too? And that tradition is in the DNA of this institution.
Got a few more questions from our listeners and that I have that I'd like to get to, but first let me give Jesse and Maximilian another chance to jump in. Go ahead, Jesse.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to something Faith said earlier and kind of contrast it with something she said much earlier in the conversation. So you noted that no one really invited Richard Spencer. No one wants him to be here. And you just spoke a little bit about the marketplace of ideas, and I think it's important to remember that in the marketplace for ideas, there's no demand for Richard Spencer, or there's very little demand for Richard Spencer. And there's pretty much no demand for Richard Spencer in Ann Arbor. So if Richard Spencer comes to Ann Arbor, and I don't really have a strong position on this one way or the other, I don't understand the law behind it, that's for folks like you to figure out. I'm still taking the LSAT, so we'll see how that works out.
You'll do just fine.
But look, I think that it's important to remember the marketplace for ideas analogy stands because there's no demand for Richard Spencer. If he comes and speaks to an empty room where nobody shows up, that's the biggest victory of it all, isn't it?
Maximilian, I see you shaking your head no.
Yeah, because this is why we are, so pissed off that the university's response is to frame this as a matter of speech and inclusion, because that's how we're debating it here. I can say that as a person of color, I would love to just not show up. But the KKK is 30 miles away. They're gonna be here. We've seen this everywhere Spencer goes. That is why we are saying that this is not just about speech. This is about the violence that comes with him. This is about the violence that logically follows when you have a man who is up on stage preaching ethnic cleansing and apartheid and forced migration and racial domination. That's not just an airy idea in a marketplace. That is actual violence that is coming down on our community. And that is what we are trying to fight against. It would be great if we could just ignore it, right? But I don't think that you can just, as any person of color can tell you, sometimes it comes in your face whether you're trying to ignore it or not.
Faith?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Maximilian said, and to answer Jesse's question, that was really more in response, that marketplace of ideas metaphor in response to trying to bridge a gap, and I don't think you can bridge that gap with Richard Spencer is why I used it. But the idea that you're ceding that public space to him, I think, is problematic as well. I don't think the answer is ignore him, because we've seen that you ignore this and it festers, it gets worse. You can ignore it. It is here, and I think you have to deal with it. And the real concern is obviously the violence, and you're exactly right that there might be other outside people who would come in and make it even more unsafe, and I think that's a real concern.
Let me get through a few more of your comments. I know our time is running short, but Bradford emailed us from Charlottesville, Virginia. Bradford wrote, "Free speech is being used as a shield for mainly one side," and side is in quotes, "the side that is advocating violent extermination of entire races in America and their allies. As a survivor of their violence last August at the protests in Charlottesville, we need to call the spades as spades, and venues should be denied to those posing a clear and present public danger. We got a tweet from Elizabeth, who wrote, "Why does white male cognitive safety trump the physical and emotional safety of people of color? Conservatives feel silenced, people of color feel threatened." Elan wrote, "I really appreciate what Jesse is saying, as he's speaking of a climate that many conservatives in Ann Arbor are feeling." And Christy is in the audience. Christy emailed, "I am a U of M professor who teaches students like your guests who aren't interested in critical debate and confused being challenged with having views that are unwelcome. But I remain devoted to inviting them to learn to think critically. It's crucial for the well-being of our society." I know that our time is short, but Angela, I wonder if we could begin to kind of land this plane by way of a question from the Cook Family Foundation, who tweeted, "How can the University of Michigan be a model for civic discourse, democracy, and free speech beyond the campus?"
I think that's a great question, and I think it's a really important commitment for institutions, especially public institutions like the University of Michigan, to be able to make, and for us to bring to bear our enormous resources, financial, human resources, drawing on the faculty, the staff, the student body, to figure out ways of being able to address these problems that are, again, not only affecting our campuses, but are affecting the media, the larger political culture of the country as well, and to dedicate what we do to that kind of real engagement and learning and openness. And I think that those kinds of things are already happening on campus. In fact, I think some of the anti-racist education has been really interesting and has been modeled in interesting ways on the campus. I have great faith in college students. I have great faith in young adults. I think that they can help us figure out a lot of these things, and we can already see that on campus. There's a great organization called We Listen that grew out of a class that we've been running, which is about thinking about these ideological positions left and right, and then thinking about where's the space, the policy space, the space about the future, the space about the kinds of things that we're thinking about, where there's overlap, where we can really start to think about what a dialogue might look like. And so now there's a student organization called We Listen. It's one of my favorite organizations on campus that are actually trying to do that kind of work amongst themselves.
Faith, I don't want to end without talking very briefly about some of the bills that are being proposed to deal with this. Are there one or two that stand out that you think people should be keeping an eye on? Briefly.
Well, I would say the one in Michigan is something to keep an eye out on because it's, I have it in front of me, and the bill from Michigan that Joshua was talking about was proposed to essentially tell the universities how they need to handle free speech on their campuses. And it's a pretty lengthy bill about, they're pretty much defining what a public area is, what's a traditional public forum. They're telling the universities how they would need to discipline their students if they disrupt a speech. One of the things that they've noted is that if you've twice been found responsible for infringing someone's expressive rights, then you'll be suspended or expelled. They have to commit to being part of a committee on free expression. It's a pretty involved bill.
Very briefly, I know we're low on time. Jesse, if there's one thing that you would like for universities who are grappling with this to keep in mind from students for your perspective, what's the first thing they should deal with? Briefly?
I think that more importantly, to respond to one of those comments from the listeners, there was one person who said that the side of free speech, in quotation marks, the side of free speech, is the side of ethnic extermination. And I think it's really important for me as an individual who is Jewish and from the descendants of folks who survived that sort of ethnic extermination, that I am unequivocally and unapologetically on the side of free speech, and I am most certainly not on the side of the bigots who advocate for that sort of ethnic extermination. And it's important to underscore that one can be both and should be both.
And Maximilian, briefly before we go, what's the one thing you'd like the university to most take into account right now?
The thing I would like the university to most take into account is that someone's free speech, as we're currently defining it here, is going to be infringed upon. Either it's going to be those of us whom the white supremacists and neo-Nazis want to silence and exterminate, or it's going to be the white supremacists themselves. There's no neutral option here. If you think that you're defending the rights of all by defending even the rights of someone like Richard Spencer, you are in fact throwing the rights of the rest of us under the bus. And this also applies to the political divide. Another thing that I want to emphasize is that if campuses are these like bastions of leftist hysteria, why is it that faculty, staff, and students on the left are the ones who are being targeted by all of these witch hunts? Faculty are being dismissed across the country.
Maximilian Alvarez, co-founder of the Campus Anti-Fascist Network, Faith Spar, communications law professor, Angela Dillard, associate dean for undergraduate education, and Jesse Arms, senior. Thank you all very much for being with us. This program comes to you from WAMU, part of American University in Washington, distributed by NPR. I'm Joshua Johnson. Thanks for listening. This is 1A. Wasn't that easy? Let's hear it one more time for Jesse, Angela, Faith, Maximilian. Thank you very much. Sit tight if you would. We need a second between our live taping and some Q&A, so sit tight for just a minute. We're going to give the four of you a chance to escape through this, I think, down through the audience. You don't have to go through the little James Bond 007 door anymore, but... So how was that? Was that worth your time? Was that good? We have time for a little bit of Q&A. Feel free if you have questions. There's a mic there and mic there. If you have questions, just, much better. Let there be. And behold, there was. Feel free to line up at the mics. We'll try and get some of your questions answered about 1A, about the work that we do, excuse me, about why I can't seem to shake this cough. Winter does not like me. I'm a Floridian. Or about the topic that we discussed tonight. We can keep that conversation going, but we welcome questions about the program or thoughts or anything like that. And we'll take as many questions as we can before they raise the lights and throw us out of here. Oh, by the way, please do introduce yourself. Your name, where you're from, and then briefly, what's on your mind. Yes, sir.
I'm Phil Tuchinski. I'm a retiree here in Ann Arbor.
Hi.
I want to add the word listening more clearly to the conversation about First Amendment and freedom of speech. We had hints of the importance of listening in tonight's program, but it's hardly ever mentioned that how we listen is what we have control over, and we do not and should not have control in general over the speech of other individuals. That, after all, to have our free speech rights, which I'm confident we all want, everyone else has to have theirs, just as simple fairness. But what we get control over is whether we listen, how we listen, and things like putting our backs to a speaker communicate very clearly the disagreement without there being any other insurrection, shall we say, in problems with the performance. I think that we all ought to attend a lot more to the relationship of listening to, in regard to our First Amendment rights.
I'm certainly not going to argue with you there about listening. I think that point is well taken. I think, and Maximilian, I don't want to speak for you, but what I have heard from a number of people, particularly with very strong social justice campaigns or anti-fascist activisms, is that at a certain point, listening becomes morally untenable. And it feels like listening becomes a tacit form of endorsement, and you can't hold it anymore. One of the things that we try to make space for, and I hear you in principle, one of the things we try to make space for is for people who can't wait anymore to speak. Because what I found is often the way to get someone to listen is to listen first. Like if you are just burning with this thing that needs saying, once I let you say it, you calm down immediately. Like you burn your fuel. And you're like, I gotta say it. And once you say it, you smolder for a second, and then I can say back to you, let me make sure I heard you. What I heard you say was da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Is that it? Yes. Oh my God, it's hot in here. How much fuel did I have? And then they're ready to listen. So I agree with you. I think what I've learned from this work is that sometimes you have to give what you want to get. You have to model the behavior you want to see. And One of the things I wish we were better at teaching the nation how to do is how to lead by listening. Listening as a form of leadership by saying, I know what I have to say, you are no threat to me, you go first. But good point, I appreciate it.
A little follow-up?
Say again?
The briefest of follow-ups.
Yes, and then I'll get to you, ma'am.
I have no problem at all with your comments. They make sense, but there's both listening and not listening.
Can I add something?
Yeah,
real quick?
go ahead.
So I just want to point out two quick things. The neo-Nazis in Gainesville who were listening to Spencer's speech, they shot at people who are now being charged with attempted murder. They were shooting at people who were standing on the sidewalk. These people weren't listening or not listening, they were standing there. The people who were run over in Charlottesville were walking home. They were walking away, right? Franz Frizen, a Holocaust survivor, said famously, if fascism could be defeated in debate, I assure you that it would never have happened, neither here in Germany, nor Italy, nor anywhere else. Whether or not you want to listen, it's happening. There is no neutral option. That's what I'm trying to say. And that those of us who think that there is are sacrificing those of us who have no recourse, who have no ability to just turn off because it's coming at us.
Ma'am, hi.
Hi. My name is Meredith, and I have a student here at U of M, and one of my children is a graduate of U of M. My question is about the freedom of speech and fake news and social media, and how those three things seem really at odds with each other. And how I would be interested in hearing how the panelists feel about how fake news is promoted on social media, and how free speech rights and fake news really just mess things up.
Well, I'm going to direct that to Faith, just by way of host prerogative. After I just share, friends of the show know that I feel this way. I hate the term fake news. Because if it's fake, 20 points, well done. Go ahead, Faith.
Yeah, I mean, legally, I think there's a couple things going on there. The case law tells us that there's no such thing as a false idea, and it's very hard to root out, inaccurate articles or things that are masking themselves as news. There's not a lot of legal hooks, if you will, to go and prosecute people who are perpetrating that, and a lot of times they're not in the United States anyways, right? And a lot of times they're bots. Obviously what congressional members have tried to do is to kind of pull in the tech companies and say, do you have a handle on these bots, and how did this happen? And they can try to ask them to be better citizens, better corporate citizens, but I don't know if they have a lot of legal, pressure points to put on them in that way. It's more about just their obligations as good corporate citizens to kind of root this out. And we have to be better. I mean, this is something that we talk about in the Communication Studies Department all the time. We have to be savvier consumers of news. We have to be more critical of our sources and what we're passing around and what we share.
Angela, briefly?
Can I also, with the social media question, say that, again, one of the kind of red herrings, I think, in this is that it keeps us from understanding, I think, the real consequences of trolling. I mean, kind of what happens to people who do take positions in the public sphere, and what can happen to you on social media, and the kinds of threats that you can get. And to be tweeted back, and death threats, and it's just horrible. And I think that really is constraining people's willingness to be out there and taking positions because of what can happen to you, and the way that you can fear for your own safety because of the kinds of positions that you've taken publicly.
I'm going to see if we can get through some more of these comments a little quicker, but I will say that we had a conversation about this just today on the show in our first hour, and we had a conversation in, I think, October, November, about how to be a savvy consumer of what you read online, and if you search for that on our website, you should be able to find that conversation. Yes?
Hi, Thank you so much for having us. My name is Elizabeth. I actually just recently completed my PhD.
Oh,
Get closer.
speak up a little.
I was speaking too softly. I
Oh, there you
apologize. So my name is Elizabeth. I actually recently completed my PhD here at the University of Michigan.
Congratulations!
Thank you.
Excellent.
It's official. And I'm in the discipline of public health. And so I think what I'm having a hard time wrap my head around is sort of where the limit of free speech ends in terms of imminent danger. Because as a public health practitioner, I'm now working with some of the Stop Spencer organizers to create safety plans for our students. And also to the comment about whether or not we can listen and sort of engage in ideas that way, the public health literature actually tells us that when students of color, women, marginalized students, Jewish students are inundated with these hateful rhetoric, it actually does have a physical consequence. And so this is already an issue of public safety. It's not even about future safety. You can look at data at UHS and CAPS to see that this threat of Richard Spencer being on campus is already causing public health harm. And so I guess my question is, where does that limit begin? Because as a public health practitioner, I think we're already there.
I'm going to give Faith a second to answer this, but I believe the law is very demanding in terms of being able to preempt free speech. You have to basically prove that the speech is intended and likely to cause imminent lawless action. It's got to be directed at physical violence and likely to cause that violence. I think that's the standard.
That's the Brandenburg standard. You just said it. So, but I would say to you on the evidence you have, and I don't want to discount that by any stretch of the imagination, that the courts haven't been very receptive to that sort of evidence when they're talking about free speech issues. They talk about free speech for good or ill, and I have my own opinions on it in a very abstract way. So, there's been plenty of attempts to say, look at all this social scientific evidence that this sort of activity, this communication causes harm, and the courts are oftentimes unmoved by it. They're just not moved by it.
I said at one of these events once, walking around with a mic, I was like, oh, I feel like Phil Donahue. And one of the younger people was like, Donna who? Like, get out of the room. Google him. Yes.
Hi there, my name's Alexi, and I'm Ann Arborite. I really appreciate that we're able to have a civil conversation today about the First Amendment and debate peacefully. I really appreciate that. I think it's oftentimes in short supply in our country today. And I wanted to say that while I absolutely agree that students are not victimized simply because they're in the ideological minority, I think we're giving short shrift to the violence against conservative speakers and students, for example, at Middlebury and at Berkeley University. And how do you reckon with the notion of what I see as an emerging heckler's veto? That is, when there's violence in response to these speakers, then people say, well, these speakers bring a lot of violence along with them.
Can I answer before I give Jesse a chance to answer? Actually, no, I'm sorry. You go first, and then I'll respond. Go ahead.
I really think that you make a strong point, and the heckler's veto is written right down on my notes here. It was something that I didn't get a chance to say tonight. But I'll address it a little bit now. I think this plays into a little bit of the last question. Okay, you talk about people have negative reactions to ideas they don't like. Sometimes they manifest themselves physically. Sometimes people's stomach turns when the president gets on the TV. Other people's stomach turns when Hillary Clinton gets on the TV. These reactions are very real and sometimes manifest themselves in medical studies. But the question of how does that play into free speech, and it goes beyond a heckler's veto. It goes beyond, okay, someone's feeling literally queasy at the thought of this person being able to express their ideas. Is that enough to set in place a veto? I think they're kind of part and parcel with each other, and I think they're really problematic, both of them, because what we have to remember is we're in Ann Arbor, and the conversation is being directed toward Charles Murray being possibly too offensive to have a voice here. But what happens in other parts of the country when, it's Al Sharpton who's the racist who shouldn't have a voice, and we don't want to hear him? And I think Al Sharpton has the right to speak anywhere and everywhere, even if I do think he's a racist, or even if some people think he's a racist. So I think it's really important to keep in mind that we do have to kind of have this liberal understanding of free speech, and the First Amendment is there for a reason, to give these people a platform. Many people, if you spend time on student government, as I have, think the University of Michigan and its policies are racist. To argue that, therefore, the university officials shouldn't be able to speak out and preach their racism. I know that there are many left groups that have large representation in this university's own student government that believe the university and its policies are racist. So, I don't know. I think it's a slippery slope.
Maximilian?
So, Jesse, you mentioned the slippery slope, and that's something that I think we really need to focus on here. I do, so I'm a columnist for The Baffler, I write for the Chronicle of Higher Ed and places like that, and I focus a lot on this topic specifically. Because while I agree with you that, like, the idea of a heckler's veto is something that, you know, like, speakers who want to engage in debate, you know, like, would need to be pissed off about, and we should address it. But I think that if you are worried about the heckler's veto, you should also be worried about Johnny Eric Williams, Dana Cloud, Lisa Durden, Amanda Gailey, Courtney Lawton, even George Chikarilla-Marr and Keeanga Yamada Taylor, if you don't like them. They're the ones who are not getting vetoed, they're getting fired. They're getting dismissed. They're getting censored by bills like the one that Faith talked about and by policies at universities. And this is why it kind of weirds me out sometimes when I see in the Vice coverage, in national news coverage, it's always about a conservative speaker who is confronting a mob of people who are unwilling and unable to engage them in debate. What I see researching, and as part of the Campus Anti-Fascist Network all over the country, I got people emailing me daily saying, hey, I'm a liberal left-leaning student and TPUSA is trying to get me fired. I'm a liberal left-leaning like faculty and my university is firing me because of something I retweeted. Like, the actual limits to free speech that are dominating university culture are coming from the opposite side that people think they're coming from. And it's actually partly because we keep saying that the left and the liberals are the real fascists.
But you were at the event. You were there. I mean, you were the one trying to shut down the speech, or the protesters who you were aligned with. And there's no arguing the basics of the fact here that you tried to speak over our speaker and shut him down.
Was that when I was standing silently by the wall holding a sign that said, our students deserve better?
I shouldn't say you. I'm saying the protesters as a collective were doing coordinated things like shutting out the lights and putting up projections and holding up signs and making screams and shouting and playing music. These are attempts at literally trying to drown out a speaker because you don't like his ideas. That's hugely problematic, and it's inconsistent with what you're saying.
Let me
tonight.
I do want to get to some more audience questions. They say we only got time for about
It's
3
not
or 4
called
more
a protest.
questions.
It's not called. No, a protest is protesting someone else's ideas and challenging them with questions like you're doing to me right now.
Hang on a second. I do want to get to some more of our audience's questions. I don't want to be disrespectful to the folks who are waiting in line. If they tell me we've only got time for about 3 or 4 more, if we move it quick, we might be able to get in about 5. But let me follow up on something that you said, Maximilian, with regards to Charles Murray being here. Did these two sides ever communicate directly before his speaking engagement?
No, but we communicated indirectly through people in the administration.
If you two had a chance to have a meeting of the minds before this event, might this have gone differently?
Possibly.
Maybe that's that. I mean, if you're actually trying to create a debate as opposed to, you know, a very visual disruptive protest, which again, there's room for that. But if the goal is to create space for a competition of ideas, don't you both have to agree on the rules first? It seems like you didn't.
Maximilian, we would have given you your...
Oh, wait a second. Let me let Maximilian answer, and then I'll come back to you. It seems like you didn't have a meeting of the minds before.
Well, so here is what we decided to do. We wanted actually to try to find out more about how this could become like less of a shit show and more of a productive debate. That was seemingly...
We're not rolling anymore. It's all right. You can say that. It's fine.
I was told I couldn't swear when
We're all grown-ups. We're all grown-ups.
Thank you.
But go ahead.
Once the racist flyers were on campus and like there was like hysteria around campus saying like, okay, this is citing the very person who's coming here and it's like threatening the people who live here, are you going to rethink your event? And you told the Daily, no. So that showed us that in fact you weren't interested in engaging with the community.
We were not going to rescind the speaker's invitation, no. But if you had reached out to us, if you had reached out to our group, not only would I have guaranteed you a private audience to talk about Dr. Murray's ideas with Dr. Murray, I would have, well, the American Enterprise Institute would have bought your dinner too.
Right. I think kind of what I'm hearing, and I'm going to come back to you in 1 second because I think you wanted to chime back in. I think what I'm kind of feeling, and this is my bias as a talk show host, right? Because my whole job is to get people together and say, let's talk. As an educator, I would have preferred someone say, I'm reading the Michigan Daily, something to go down, I'm going to go talk to these two sides and say, listen, this event is going to happen. But we are an educational institution, so you two need to work something out. Because otherwise, you're both just going to walk away pissed, as opposed to finding a way so you could both walk away feeling somewhat satisfied that you'd been heard, and there'd been a fair fight. And I don't know if that would have been possible, but I'm interested to see how universities will find ways to do that going forward.
It is possible, though. It is.
Well, hey, I promised this young man I'd go back to him. Go ahead. Briefly.
Very brief follow-up. Maximilian, I absolutely take your point about liberal professors and liberal students being silenced across campuses. I condemn that. Now I ask you, are you willing to condemn the violence that's been heaped upon conservative students, that you saw women being beaten with poles and pepper sprayed who went to see Milo Yiannopoulos speak at Berkeley simply for wearing a Make America Great Again hat?
So here's what I would say, that I'm all for people not getting violently, assaulted just because of what they believe.
That's great.
Right? But at the same time, I think that what Richard Spencer and even people like Milo Yiannopoulos show is that they are not just saying what they believe. They're trying to do something with their speech. They're trying to alienate and even eliminate people like me. So what you're actually asking me to do is say, I forgive people like me for being pissed off that someone wants them eradicated.
Let me keep going to the next person in line right behind you. I know our time is short. Go ahead. If you can keep your comment or question real tight.
Okay. My name is Daniel Throne.
I'll be back to you in just 1 second. Give me 1 second. Go ahead, sir.
My name is Daniel Throne. I'm from Ypsilanti, Michigan. I go to Eastern Michigan University, and I'm actually part of a new organization on Eastern called YAL, Young Americans for Liberty. We're a libertarian organization. And even in libertarianism, I'm afraid that anti-fascist organizations are going to come and protest and perhaps assault my fellow board members. And the trend I found in anti-fascist ways of protesting and how conservative speakers, and I've done the research, it gets really ugly. It's that there's a sense of neo-Marxism that goes on within these protesters. And my question is, should we be concerned with the essential rise of communist ways again and neo-Marxism?
Can I ask you I have to ask you to clarify your point. You said you're concerned about these organizations at Eastern Michigan University, is it?
Yep.
Eastern Michigan University. Have you tried talking to them? Have you tried just saying, look, I see you, I have heard about you, but I need to know you. Have you tried talking to them?
I don't know their names or faces.
So these are not organizations that are on campus. They kind of show up and then they disappear?
That's the general fear, that they just come out of. They're professional protesters, basically.
Okay, so you're not talking about like a student organization?
No. Well, we do have, no.
Okay.
I just don't know. I would love to have conversations with different members of these organizations.
I'm actually going to put that to Angela, in particular because there are a number of universities, including the Milo Yiannopoulos protest at Berkeley and others, that have attracted people from off campus who have nothing to do with the student organization.
Well, there's that, but let me also say, and I think it's really important to stress this, that while, the protests at Berkeley or, the different things that happen at Middlebury, where those get a lot of attention, nobody writes the story that the conservative speaker came to campus and, talked and it was fine. Nobody writes that story, although that happens all the time. We had Charlie Kirk on campus earlier this week from Turning Points, was fine. We've had other conservative speakers on campus. YAF has done some interesting work over the years. They had a really interesting debate with Dinesh D'Souza and Bill Ayers. We've had times where, these campus groups have worked together. I mean, this does happen. Maybe we want it to happen more, but I think because we don't talk about those kinds of moments, again, we get into this really red herring false narrative that it's not possible to have those kinds of conversations on campus so that they can happen. I think you have to be really thoughtful. We have to get people together beforehand. We have to talk it through, but it's not that it's not impossible. I mean, we even had Milo Yiannopoulos on campus a couple of years ago. It was pretty quiet.
I know we are low on time, so I'm going to ask you to make your point real brief, and I'll see how many more we can get through. Go ahead.
Well, I'll try to. My name is Alan Haber. I'm a local activist of many years. And while this question of free speech, I believe that ideas need to be confronted with ideas, however that debate is ranged. But the First Amendment is more than speech. It is also, and the critical question in Ann Arbor is now, the right to petition for redress of grievance, another part of the First Amendment. And many, many citizens in Ann Arbor, 5,700 and more, signed a petition to redress the grievance that the city of government wants to sell the center of our city for money for a big high-rise apartment building where most of the people in Ann Arbor pretty much would prefer it be a commons, a center of the city park, a place for everyone. That's really a place for free speech and assembly. The government uses whatever means it can to avoid dealing with the impediments of the Constitution. And the city government breaks the Constitution by not certifying our petition.
Your question, sir?
Pardon me?
Your question, sir. I know we got to keep going.
Yeah, my question is, how do we deal in Ann Arbor with the abridgment of our right to petition for redress of grievance on the actions of the city council when the city attorney will violate the Constitution by not recognizing our petition? That is also part of the free speech.
Well, I'm not very learned on matters of the city council. Maybe someone here could answer that, or...
No, but there are plenty of great, I mean, as you know, there are plenty of great organizations on campus and off campus who are addressing this. So I would encourage you to seek out organizations like the Collective Against White Supremacy, the Black Student Union, people in the Stop Spencer movement, who are doing not more than just addressing the university, but who are trying to form a community collective to do what you're saying, to build power apart from the administration or the local government. Because we are the citizens. We should have more of a say in what happens in our home, and right now we don't.
Yes, sir.
We have a petition here, everyone.
Go ahead, sir.
Awesome. Hey, my name is Seth Wiley. I'm a graduate student here at the university. And I'm a huge fan, Josh. Oh my gosh. Every day.
I should have taken your question first. What were you waiting in the back of the line for?
Every day, you're in the morning briefing.
Thank you.
I just thought I'd ask, because you bring up Charles Murray a lot. What is the role of consensus? And I don't just mean consensus in the fact of just everybody agreeing. I mean consensus, like consensus of expertise, consensus in the general idea. I just want to know what your opinions are, because Charles Murray's not really that highly considered in any really real group, but just in general, like what's the role?
I admit I am not deeply versed in Charles Murray, so I probably shouldn't opine on him one way or another, but in terms of consensus, I feel like, and I'm going to try to take your question. I know she's here to throw me off the stage. Don't throw me off the stage. I want to take her question. Don't throw me off the stage. In terms of consensus, I think that's partly our job as journalists. You know, that's why I'm so worried about the health of the Fourth Estate and the ability of journalism to be a trusted pillar of democracy. Let me state it very clearly. You don't get to pick your facts. Facts are facts. And my job as a journalist is to say, no, really, 2 and 2 is 4. There's always been 4. There's no liberal 4. Ain't no conservative 4. 4. So my job is to help create an institution that creates consensus. If we can make these institutions viable and trustworthy, then we win. I feel like this is an adjunct of the question I get from a lot of NPR fans who are like, oh my goodness, I really like your show, but I'm so worried that people aren't listening to the program. They're listening to all these other crazy programs, and they talk about all this other crazy stuff. How do we get them to listen? And I always remind them, first of all, that no one likes to be thought of as a them. Othering people is very dangerous. And what looks to you like somebody's bubble or somebody's silo may really be their scar. They may have come to us in the past and let us go because they knew we weren't welcoming to them. I can't tell you how many conservatives I've had who will write into us and say, I love 1A because I didn't know that I belonged here, and it's nice to know that you respect me. That's kind of the first key to creating consensus, is creating a space where the emotional relationship is healthy. Maya Angelou once said, people will forget what you say. They'll forget what you do, but they will never forget how you make them feel. So our first responsibility is not even to the facts. It's to you as a person. It's to show you care. John Maxwell has said, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So my job is to make sure you understand you're welcome here. That's the one and only consensus I'm really worried about, because that's the hard one. And if we do the hard one well, we can talk about anything. But that's the challenge, is making sure people, forget about the facts. Like, we'll argue over the facts once we get you all in the room to sit down and not keep elbowing one another. If we can get you to face forward and get you happy when you hear the 1A theme, get you to clap at the same time, then we can talk about anything. I think the human relationship comes first. People are hurt, people are scared, people are pissed for justifiable reasons, and often they just want to know, are you paying attention? Did you hear me? Do you see me? I just said something important. Did what I say mean anything to you? Once you do that, once you lead by listening, anything's possible. And then we can talk about all the tough issues and have a consensus of facts. But first, we got to get everybody in the same room. One last comment, quickly, and then they're going to throw me off the stage. Yes?
About the group that the Florida shooter was a part of, I don't see how that is any different from a terrorist cell. They are a group of people with radical political beliefs that is gathering weapons and training themselves to take lives in order to defend and spread their political ideology.
Well, the law on, and I'm not super versed on this, but the laws on terrorism typically are directed toward foreign actors as opposed to domestic actors. There's some conversation about whether that is the way that it should be. I don't know if anyone here has more expertise, but as far as I know, I think what you're getting at culturally is also kind of connected to the way we talk about these things, about whether or not we view these kinds of organizations in a different light than we would view something like ISIS. And I feel like from my perch as a host, the conversation has shifted, where people feel like it's time to take a much harsher stance on these groups that are on racist watch lists and like the SPLC's hate watch and so on.
Which Richard Spencer is.
Which Richard Spencer is. The flip side of that is we did an hour about the SPLC's hate watch list and how controversial it is, because the criteria for that list are, depending on the organization, they might say, well, look, we have very strong views, but we're not trying to, relegate black people to second-class citizenship. Like, we don't belong on the list. So then the question becomes, if that's not the standard, what is? Who gets to decide who's a hater and who is so far beyond the bounds of American society that you lose the protections of the Constitution? Remember, terrorists are not protected by the United States Constitution. You've committed an act of war against the United States, and so you're a criminal. You're a federal criminal. At what point do we decide that somebody's speech cuts them off from the Constitution? That's a very slippery slope, and it's dangerous territory. There's a point at which it turns into violence, and 17 people are dead in southwestern Florida, not far from where I grew up, because partly this young man bought into something vile. The story's not finished being told. I think the latest that we've heard is that this young man confessed to having attacked the school, brought all these weaponry. He's begun to give kind of a narrative of what happened. He attacked the school, went and got a bite to eat later, and kind of relaxed until the police came to get him. So we're learning more about just how depraved this young man is. But beyond that, for us in the what do we do now phase, it's touchy. Who do we carve out? And who and why? And where's the line? And where does the line get fuzzy, and where is the line clear? That's partly why the First Amendment tries very hard to be content neutral, because your assessment of my content might be very negative, while yours is positive, and who do we listen to? But you're right, I think that's one of those things we have to figure out as a culture. How we figure that out, I don't know, and I don't even have time to keep thinking it through because Lynette is trying to push me off the stage. Can we please say thank you to our four guests?
You keep saying I'm trying to push you off the stage.
Yes, you are.
So let's be clear.
I know when I'm being pushed.
Let's be clear. There are a lot of journalists in the room, and so this is on the record.
Yes.
Far from trying to push you off the stage, we would love to keep you here.
Oh, boy.
Diane Rehm came here frequently, and you can count on future invitations. Steve Schramm. You can count on Wallace House. You can absolutely count on Wallace House and Michigan Radio inviting you back, and I hope that you will all join us back here. Before we get to thanking Joshua, though, I do want to point out that answering a call from a booker who asks you to be on a national radio program is a tough call to make, even when you're going to be dialing in and your people are going to be hearing you on the radio. It's a big leap to make. Saying yes to a show booker who is asking you to be on a live stage in your own community with your own friends, potential foes, and people you will see immediately after the show and every day on campus after you're on the stage takes a lot more. And so, you've already done it with your applause, but I know that you will join me in thanking Jesse Arm, Angela Dillard, Faith Spar, and Maximilian Alvarez for being here, but also for modeling the kind of civil conversation about tough issues that we should be and can be doing more of on campus, in the Ann Arbor community, and around the country. I thank you so much for being here. A standing O, well deserved. And I hope that you see the bar that we're trying to set for engagement in the campus community. And if you have not been at Wallace House events, I hope you will continue to join us. We have another one next Tuesday. New York Times columnist Brett Stevens will be here for what will surely be an interesting talk called Free Speech and the Necessity of Discomfort. From 4 to 5:30 at the Lydia Mendelson Theater. We will continue this conversation about free speech there. And before you walk out the door, please join me all in thanking Joshua Johnson and the team from 1A.